Kendall Kaut, SicEm365.com, basketball writer, analyst. One of the stories that's pinned near the top, I mentioned Craig's story about summarizing Baylor's cornerbacks during the football season. One of them, Kendall. With EJ sideline to look at Baylor's best options moving forward, Kendall Kaut joins us, Paul, Craig, and David on SicEm 365 Radio. Kendall, obviously, when he went down, the first thing I thought about is, my God, is he ever going to be able to get up? Because it was so unbelievable, especially when you saw the replay. We've heard from Jason King. We've even heard from Mark Vital about what they do going forward. You put up some notes, some analytics from Evan and from yourself. What can they do? What are the options going forward?
Always a pleasure to be on with you all, Smoak. I think kind of two things will situate this. Number one, how many more minutes a game can Flo play? Jason mentioned earlier on the show that Flo's gotten a little bit into foul trouble. Over a 40-minute game, he gets 5.4 fouls a game, so he's going to play 30 minutes a night now on some nights. Got to be a little bit better there. And then the second one that I touched on a little bit in that article that the folks can read on the premium side of SicEm 365 is that Jeremy Sohan played the 5 against Iowa State and Alabama. Baylor had a lot of optimism about those lineups, but with some injuries, they haven't gotten to play them as much. Now that opportunity presents itself.
Kendall, a question we I'm sure you've seen on the boards, I'm sure you've seen on Twitter, people asking, what about Zach Loveday in his role here? It would seem to me that we might have seen him a little bit more than we have if he was viable as far as contributing a lot.
I agree with that assessment, Paul. The challenge for Zach is that he has a role in the future on this Baylor program, but Zach plays basketball differently than John and even Jeremy will play, right? Zach is not somebody who's as quick laterally. His strength is that he's 6'10", so he's a bigger dude, and he can step out and hit threes. That three-point shooting skill is a valuable skill, but the defense has to transform a lot. So getting a little technical, when Baylor plays screens, what they want to do is switch. I take your guy, you take my guy, like you're playing pickup basketball in a gym. That's what they do most of the time, even for screens involving Flo Thamba, though sometimes they'll push him to the sideline. Zach Loveday, I don't think feels comfortable switching out onto guards on the perimeter. John and Flo talked about that summer when Baylor switched to the no-middle defense in 2020 before the Italy trip. They were awful at that. It's taken them a while to get to this level. So to ask Zach to go from not being in the rotation, either playing that defense or to ask everyone else on Baylor's defense to switch things, I think that's pretty challenging. Maybe he gets a few minutes here or there, but I would be surprised if Zach Loveday getting major minutes is the answer right now. But, Zach Loveday's proven dudes wrong in the past. Prove this guy wrong.
First chance to see Scott Drew and company match up with the Longhorns. Your thoughts on the win? Obviously, most of the talk's going to be about JTT, and it kind of dampened the fun of that victory. But their domination continues, and your thoughts on getting out of that game with a W?
Utter crushed Craig in that game. I mean, that kind of speaks where the two programs are. You're Texas, one of Baylor's best players, the heart and soul of the team goes down. You're riding high from a victory against Kansas, and you can't do it. Courtney Ramey said in the postgame that Texas treated beating KU in a close game in Austin like they'd won the national championship. Baylor treated losing to Kansas a week ago like we got to get a lot better, and Baylor has gotten a lot better. So to me, that speaks to where the two programs are. Chris Beard put all 5 guys from his starting lineup out in the press conference after the game to kind of say, it's on all of us. But if you're Texas and you're playing 12 guys this late in the season, you don't have any guys. Baylor, if they had 12 guys, would play more guys. But the men that Baylor has have really shown how good this team is, and to still have the fortitude and the mental will to play that well after John goes down, again, speaks to just where Baylor is the program compared to that university in Austin.
I do not expect him to win in Lubbock. I also did not expect him to lose at home, but I knew Texas Tech was really good. But if, in fact, they survive tomorrow, Wednesday night, if they win in Lubbock without Jonathan Chamwachachua, and who knows with L.J. Cryer, what does that – and again, I don't expect him to, but what would that say?
I think it would say that Baylor has a very legitimate chance to probably be considered co-favorites to win the league and the Big 12, and that Baylor can still think of themselves as a Final Four team. I agree, Smokey, that I would guess Baylor will probably be a 1.5 or 2-point underdog for those folks that, unlike me, enjoy gambling with their money. But I think Texas Tech is very beatable. At the same time, they don't shoot well from 3 all the time. They played some close games they shouldn't. But Mark Adams is one heck of a tactician, and going into Lubbock, which will be a very hostile environment, probably the second or third toughest game as a visiting team in Lubbock this season, that's a real challenge. I don't think Baylor's kind of playing with house money in this game. You don't have to win this one. You don't feel bad about yourself if you lose. But I think Baylor's got a real shot on Wednesday.
Kendall Kaut with us, Sikkim 365 Radio, college basketball writer, analyst as well from Sikkim 365 Radio. Hey, you mentioned some of the numbers from Evan Miyakawa. First of all, I know that's pretty amazing, but what is actually, because sometimes you look at that, it could be Chinese if you don't know what you're looking at. What are the actual, is it worse when he's not on the floor offensively, Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua with flow, or defensively?
So right now, it looks a little bit worse defensively, Smokey. The thing that's a little tough about that is Baylor has such a, what the nerds like to say, small sample size of that because they didn't play too many possessions in Ames or even against Alabama with that lineup. And so small sample sizes can get weird since it's Valentine's Day. And again, there's nothing more romantic for the folks than listening to me on Valentine's Day. Let's give an analogy there. If you walk into the bar and you got a date with the two most attractive people in that bar, it might tell you, wow, you're unstoppable. No matter what happens, you're always going to get dates with the two most attractive people in any bar. Or it might tell you on one night in one atmosphere, you got a little bit lucky and that luck happened twice. You can flip heads 5 times in a row on a coin, but it doesn't tell you that the coin's rigged yet, but it might raise some suspicion. Those lineups give us a little bit, I think, though, when you mix in that lineup data with looking at the film. And what I think you see that gives us some hope for Jeremy Sochan at the 5 is how well he can jump into the air and how controlled he can play from the perimeter as a scoring option. Against Iowa State, they had their big man George Conduit on him. And Jeremy Sochan was able to drive, get into the lane on only one dribble. I think that shows how effective he can be and why the lineups that say, hey, they're a little bit better offensively maybe than they were even with John on the floor, they can be good there. And I think defensively there's some things to look at the film that show they're good, but the lineup numbers do show that Baylor's a little bit worse defensively without John. I think that's probably going to be the case going forward.
Whose role do you expect to change the most?
Really good question. I think that it's one of those deals where everybody's role changes some. I think Sochan's role changes the most because he's going to have to play center more often than he had in the past. He can't get as many cheap fouls because he's going to have to play 25 minutes a night plus going forward. And I also think that Kendall Brown's role is maybe the role that hasn't been looked at that will change some. He was such a good cutter to open the season. Sam Vecini of The Athletic called him the best cutter in the country. Some people think he's the best cutter in the upcoming NBA draft, assuming he declares, and I think he will. And so I think he gives you an option as a screener who can roll hard to the rim. And we know how good he is jumping up, so he gives you some lob opportunities. So I think he'll play on a different side of the floor. It's a little bit different role for Kendall Brown as well.
Kendall, good stuff, man. There's so much inside Sikkim365.com in that premium section. Kendall Kaut one. We've had Jason King, among others. Thanks for your time. Have a great week.
Appreciate it, fellas.
It added another piece. There are times, and Craig, you've mentioned this, you could write a story, and Paul, that's one of the reasons you stopped writing as much. There are times you can have 15, 18 stories, and then you have previews that pop up for Baylor, Texas Tech, the women, or whatever, and it get lost. It is sometimes so much that you have to look at the titles and go, okay, which one do I have time to read?
Well, if you're a Baylor sports fan, you definitely get your money's worth. I mean, there's no lack of things to read about on a daily basis. And, it can kind of be frustrating when I'm a very slow writer, If you a nightmare for me is like, hey, write a paper in an hour. I would freak out. I'd have the worst anxiety attack. I'm not good at it. And, I spent a lot of time on, I don't even remember what the article was about, and it was up for like maybe 3 hours, and then it was the 7th article on the site, and I was like, it's been up for 3 hours, a 7th article on the site.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's kind of frustrating in a way, just to be perfectly honest, but it's also great because there's so much content to try and absorb, and if you don't get to mine, then you get to read somebody else's, and either way, it's still on the website, so that's all good. But there's plenty to choose from there, and if you're a premium member, people ask how they can help out with the show and things like that. I mean, that's an indirect way or a pretty direct way to do it is just support the website, and in turn, you support the radio show. So if you're a Baylor fan, I definitely check out that premium section.
There's topics, and I won't go through all of them. Some of them are the same ones, but with Jonathan Tchamwa-Tchatchoua out, a look at Baylor's best options moving forward. Kendall Kaut. Final 2021 season grades cornerbacks from Craig. Recruiting notes, new wide receiver offer. Grayson. I put up the note about JTT's eligibility options. That was last night. That probably needs to come down at some point. Let's chat from Grayson. Basketball adds big win plus the green and gold date. Introducing Athlete Plus, which is a new feature for Sikkim 365 product and experience. Week of February 14th recruiting. January, February men's basketball recruiting. These are just pinned. And then also upcoming showing of the amazing documentary that continues, An Ode to Joy, with locations Waco, Tyler, and Austin coming up around the corner. When we come back,